Welcome back to part 2 of the Models Within the Model video tutorial. You should have already completed part 1, and we left off by adding a brand new view in your project called Add Owner. So you want to make sure you open up that view called Add Owner, and we're going to type in the following code for that view. And there's going to be a lot of code, so I'm going to display it there, and then I'll go through it and explain everything that's going on. So the first thing I did is in this view, I added a model for the project, and it's going to be cars owner.models.car owner. Now remember, the car owner model, the cars owner model in our project is the models within the model. It's the one model that has the links to the cars model and the owners model. And we're going to go ahead and have our add car view, and within this view we have our add car, and we have our display name for working with this model where it shows the car name. I'll go ahead and leave that there so you can start typing that in. And then we have another display for, and notice the link of how we work with this model. We say model.cars.carName is the display name for, and then the display for, which allows you to do your edit, is the same thing, the model.cars.carName. I'm going to scroll down, make sure you get that whole table in, and then we're going to actually create an HTML form using the HTML begin form helper. We call our anti-forgery token, which sets up a cookie on our user's machine and on the client machine, and we'll validate that later on. And then we start setting up our div, and the first thing I do is I set up a validation summary, so that will go and make sure all the validations work. I set up a hidden for the car ID, a hidden for the car name, and a hidden for the owner ID. Now, these three hidden fors is so that the user doesn't need to enter them or modify them, but we need those to actually work with the owner of a car. We have to pass those fields to our controller so that we can find records and update records. Then we create the following. I'll go ahead and drop these down on multiple lines so you can see them. And we did a label for the model.owner. Remember, owner is another model inside of our model. And we show the owner first name. And then we do the same thing and we do our editor for the first name. So that displays the label, that displays the editor. And then we have validation messages in case they don't enter in that value. And then we do the same thing for the last name fields. Once again, it's the model and then the owner model within the model, and then the last name. And we have validation messages for that. And then we have our submit button. And then the very last thing I put in here is I just have another action link which says if they ever click on this, they'll go back to the index of the cars model. Now that we have our index in place to display, let's go back to our cars controller. And here's our get for the add owner. But now we need to have a post for the add owner. So let me go through this code and explain what it means. So let's take a look at the post action method for the add owner. First of all, we see that it is an HTTP post attribute. This is where it checks the cookie on the computer's machine compared to the cookie on the server to make sure they match, which helps protect cross-site scripting. And here's the action method. This action method receives one parameter, cars owner, which is a cars owner type. In other words, it receives the model from the submit button back in our view. Next thing we do is we make sure that we pass the validity checks, and then we go and create a brand new object called entity of type owner model. And then what we do is we pull the information out of the owner model in the car's owner for the first name and the last name, and assign those to the owner first name and the owner last name attributes in the owner model. Then we go to the database context object, to the owner model, which is the DB set, and we do an add, so we add a brand new record, adding that new owner model. Now notice you didn't have to add the owner ID, but that's because the owner ID is an identity field, and so it is auto-generated. And then we say database save changes. So we now have a new owner record that has been added to the owner DB set, which really is the owner model mapped to the owner table in the database. Then we create a brand new variable. We call it new owner. And we say let's work with the entity that we're currently working with, which is this entity object. And now that we added the record to it and we saved it, it now has a value in the owner ID because that was an identity field. We make sure we cast it as an int, store it to that variable new owner. Then using our database context object, we now go create another variable called cars, which is working with the database, the car DB set, which is the car model, and we go and grab the first record from that database where the car ID is equal to the same car ID found in the cars model found in the cars owner. So that will go and grab the current cars record and store it back to that object. If we didn't find it, then we display an error message. And if we did find it, we go and now take that new owner, which was our owner ID we created from the owner record right there in the DB save changes. We take its value and store it to the model's owner ID and save the changes. So in other words, we now link the owner ID value with the current car that we are working with, and then we redirect back to the index. If we didn't have a valid model, then we just go back to the view and pass that car's owner object. So that's the post for actually creating a brand new owner record and attaching that owner record to the cars record. All that's left for us to do now is to go create a cars owned controller that will be called if the owner ID has already been assigned to a car. Now remember, back in our index, we had the index view, which took us to the add owner. In the add owner, we had our view that adds a brand new owner to a car, which called that controller. And if you remember back in our cars controller, on the add owner view, that's where we said, let's go see if the car already had an owner. And if they already had an owner, then we were going to go ahead and redirect to the car owned action method in the cars controller. So we still need to write that view and controller. So let's go ahead and do that. So what we need to do now is right here on this view, we just need to go ahead, and here's that view for the car owned. We just need to come into that cars controller and make sure that you're putting that brand new controller we're going to write in the right spot so we don't have any parentheses or curly brace problems. So you're going to go and write this new action method called cars owned, car owned, singular, and you're going to return the view for that. And then we just need to right mouse click in that action method for car owned, and we need to choose add view, and we're going to go ahead and leave it car owned and empty without a model, and go ahead and click add. And then I want you to go ahead and change that view to look like this code, which simply says we set the view bag, we have a header 2, We say the car is already owned, and then we have an HTML helper action link which says go back to the car listings, which would send them back to the index action method in the cars controller. So this is a nice way that you could actually display error messages if you didn't want something to happen. Once we're all done, let's go ahead and save this. Let's build it, make sure we have good code, which we do, and all that we have left to do now is run this. So the way I want to run this is I want to go to the index view in the cars folder. I have multiple indexes up. That's the index for the home folder. Here's the index for the cars folder, and I'll click on that, and then I will just run that application. So I'll just go ahead and make sure I'm in that index view of the cars controller and run the web app. And I'm going to go ahead and resize my window so you can see everything. And here we are in the index action method in the cars controller. We list all of the cars, and we can click add owner on that. And we'll type the first name as Bugs Bunny. Click add owner. And if I try to click add owner again for that Camry, it would say that car is already owned. Go back to the car listings. One thing you could do is you could go back to this view and actually display the owner if you wanted to. But Mini Cooper doesn't have one, so let's add that. And we'll add Mini Mouse, add owner. Let's go to VW Bug, and we'll add Daffy Duck, add owner. So they all should have add owner. So if I try to add owners on any of the others, it says it's already owned. Go back to the car listings. And that's how you have a model within a model.